Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. We left off looking at the overview of what is the GI tract, and what we are ready to look at here are the basic 4 layers. Now, we will see some variations in these layers as we go through, for instance, esophagus, stomach, small and large intestine. We'll see some variations there. But this is our basic pattern of what we're looking for. So we are going to find 4 layers of tissue to the gastrointestinal tract. And we're going to start with the mucosa, which is our innermost layer. I actually don't want to use that color, so let me try again here. And then we're going to have a submucosa, Muscularis externa, and then serosa would be our outermost layer. And so I suppose we're going here from inner to outer because as materials entering the body, you know, that bolus and then that chyme is going to be in contact with the mucosal layer. When we talk about the mucosal layer, we are going to have epithelium tissue, an epithelium tissue layer, and we're going to see mostly stratified squamous in the places where we are just moving food through. So that's going to be mouth. That's going to be pharynx. It's going to be esophagus. And then again, as we get into the rectum and anus, we're not, of course, moving food through at that point, but we do have a more solid material that we are moving through. And then we'll see the majority then of the stomach, small and large intestine is going to be lined with this simple columnar. And so I'm going to abbreviate small intestine throughout our presentations as SI and large intestine as LI. And then I forgot to write in the stomach, so let's do that as well. From there, we're going to have a lamina propria, which is going to be connective tissue. And this is going to hold blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and this is where that malt is located. Malt, remember, is the mucosa associated lymphoid tissue. And we talked about that as almost being like the star of the show when it comes to the lymphatic system. And then I'm going to, in red, list out my muscle areas. And so we have in this mucosa layer, we have a thin layer of smooth muscle called muscularis mucosae. So I'll circle that, and it's in red. And this is going to be a very thin layer of smooth muscle. And that's going to help to create folds, which we'll see will increase surface area. I'm going to go ahead and highlight my 3 layers so that they will stand out even as we fill up our notes with some writing. Also, in the mucosa, I wanted to mention what are called endocrinocytes. Endocrinocytes. And we're going to find endocrinocytes at the stomach and the small intestine. And these are going to be endocrine cells in the stomach and small intestine, meaning they're going to be releasing hormones. And we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about those hormones. So that is something we're going to need to be paying close attention to. As we continue to move from the inside of that digestive tube toward the outer layers, we go from the innermost mucosa to the next layer, which is the submucosa. The submucosa is going to be a dense connective tissue. It's again going to hold blood vessels and lymphatic vessels. It's going to have some important submucosal glands. So we're going to see some important mucus secretions that's going to be protecting the epithelial tissue of the GI tract from both, to help move material through and also protect against like the really acidic pH of the stomach. So we'll see that. And then we also have in the submucosa what's called the submucosal plexus. And so let's highlight that one as well. Submucosal plexus. The submucosal plexus is a part of the ENS, which remember stands for enteric nervous system. And so we're going to be talking more about that in a later video. So this is going to be neural tissue that's going to regulate digestive secretions and react to presence of food. And I'm going to put food in quotation marks because remember, depending where we are in the tract, it's food when it enters the mouth, but then we call it bolus. And then once it's in the stomach, mixing with hydrochloric acid, we call it chyme. So sometimes I'll just be really generic and say food stuff, just to kind of indicate it's not like food such that we recognize on the table, right? Okay, the next layer, so again, we're going from inner to outer. So we have mucosal layer, submucosa, and now muscularis externa. And I'm going to also change to a red pen because this muscularis externa is a layer of smooth muscle. And we're going to see both inner circular smooth muscle layer and we're going to have an outer longitudinal smooth muscle layer. So we're getting smooth muscle, but we are getting it oriented in different directions. And what we'll see is that will give us different kinds of movements. When we talk about the muscularis externa, we will see that it's involved in mechanical digestion. It's going to be involved in propulsion of foodstuff through the tract. And it's going to be involved in mixing. So helping to really churn together the food stuff with the digestive enzymes and so forth to really enhance that chemical digestion. So to really enhance chemical digestion. So for the most part, we see this as smooth muscle. We haven't talked a whole lot about that in the course. And so we are going to add in some details about what are important characteristics of smooth muscle. So we're going to add that in its own video coming up. But we will also see that like our proximal and our distal ends of the tract. So proximal, we're talking mouth, pharynx, and then distal, we're talking rectum, anus. We'll see we have skeletal muscle instead. And so that's going to give us conscious control of both swallowing and defecation. So by having skeletal muscle at the proximal and the distal ends, we get control over swallowing, conscious control over swallowing and defecation. The outermost layer of the GI tract is called the serosa, and we're going to find this in the abdominopelvic cavity. Meaning as we trace through that track, we're going to see this once we enter the abdominopelvic cavity. So that's going to be around the stomach, small and large intestine, right? And what we'll see is that the serosa is actually composed of what's called the visceral peritoneum. And so we're going to pick up some details on that here in just a few minutes. All right. So again, looking at the 4 layers of the GI tract or alimentary canal. So this is the generic description as we go from the pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small and large intestine. Of course, we'll see some differences and modifications as we go into each one of those particular areas. But we're going to go from the innermost mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, externa, and then serosa as the outermost. All right, y'all, stay tuned. As always, take care of yourselves and each other.